I just can't take no pleasure in killing. There's just some things you gotta do. Don't mean you have to like it. Welcome to Your Pick, a film podcast. I'm Tatum.
And I'm Geneva.
We are two friends who love movies and love sharing them with each other. Each week, we take turns picking a film that is close to our hearts and talk about why it moves us, to tears, to laughter, and everything in between. We celebrate the craft of filmmaking, as well as the unique and personal ways we find meaning in the movies we watch. All right. Yeah. So, our audience doesn't need to know this, but I'm going to say it anyway because we always start our episodes the same. So I'm going to say something different this time. Even though you guys as our audience probably don't care, I just wanted to say Geneva and I just talked for an hour and a half before starting to record this.
We had one of the deepest conversations of our lives.
about our cynical mentalities on the outlook of this world and our country and the state of humanity. So that's the mental space that we're in entering into this episode, which is kind of fitting.
We should have just caught some of it on the record, but oh well. Didn't know where that conversation was going to go.
Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, Geneva, have you been watching anything recently? Preferably anything happy?
I did watch one thing. So yet again, we're recording these episodes in a pretty short time frame. There's only been a few days since our last record, so I've really only watched one movie to report. And that is a Western that I've actually been wanting to see for quite a while. A Western called Red River, which was directed by Howard Hawks, stars John Wayne and Montgomery Clift, who I've watched a few Montgomery Clift movies recently. Big fan of his. So I think this may actually have been his film debut. Don't hold me to that. I need to look that up. But yeah, really, really great movie. I was really interested in watching it, not just because of Montgomery Clift, but also because this was John Wayne teaming with Howard Hawks prior to Rio Bravo, which is my favorite Western of all time. Tatum has heard me rave about it many times. One of these days I'll have it. I'll do it on the pod, but
I'm sure you will.
I'm going to give Tatum a break from Westerns for quite a while.
Thank you.
Yes.
Although the Oxbow incident I did enjoy.
You did, yes. I was very, very happy about that. But I will take mercy on you. We will not do Rio Bravo for quite a while.
Muchas gracias.
Yeah, Red River is a really good movie. It's very much kind of in the mode of sort of a forerunner to something like The Searchers, where it's really exploring the darker side of the John Wayne persona. It's very much about that idea of obsession and power and the way that it isolates you and kind of hardens and crystallizes things that were originally good in your persona and kind of brings out the evil. And yeah, it's a really good movie. It's basically an intergenerational conflict between John Wayne and his adopted son, who's played by Montgomery Clift, about this cattle drive that they're attempting to do, this like insane, like 100+ mile, hundreds of miles cattle drive. The one criticism that I would have of this movie, I will not spoil anything. I'll just say I feel like it shifts tones a little bit toward the end, which I don't think fully worked for me. I wish the ending had been a little bit stronger and had carried through more on some of the themes that the movie had been developing. But overall, I think it's fantastic. If you like Westerns, if you like John Wayne, if you like Montgomery Clift, definitely check out Red River.
Would you recommend it if someone doesn't like any of those things?
I do need to show you a Montgomery Clift movie at some point because you love James Dean, so I feel like it'd be.
I do like James Dean.
See, yeah, your reaction because
How
it's
can
that
you not
similar.
Like James Dean, honestly,
I know, right? How can you not? But it's that same, that original generation of method actors with, James Dean, Marlon Brando, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, really fascinating.
Do you remember when I told you when I was watching that HBO Max special? I forget specifically what it's called. But it was about Paul Newman and kind of his.
Oh yeah, the last
life.
movie stars.
Yeah, and there was like a whole episode that basically talked about how him, Marlon Brando, and James Dean were all in the same acting class in New York at the same time. It's like,
Wait.
how is this possible?
Oh
And
my
I think
gosh.
Montgomery Clift might have been in it too for a hot minute.
Probably, yeah.
But it's just like this weird, just the fact that that happened is absolutely insane. And they were kind of talking about how Paul Newman was incredibly intimidated and how he was like, how can I be an actor? Look at these other people. Like, I can't survive next to these geniuses. But anyway, yeah, you just made me think of that.
Yeah. Wow. That's fascinating. I have yet to see that special. I should watch it very soon.
Yeah, I think you in particular would really like it.
Yeah, I think I would.
Anything else or just that one?
Just that, really. I've been watching a BBC miniseries called The Moonstone, which is an adaptation of a Wilkie Collins novel. I'd not had any prior familiarity with the novel and not seen any other version of it adapted before. I'm enjoying it. It's not the greatest thing I've ever seen. There are some things where I'm like, I feel like you just kind of... This seems like a weird criticism, but I feel like they just took the book and then put it into a screenplay format and then just filmed it, which... I mean, as a purist, I love, but I feel like it doesn't make for very... The way that a Victorian novel is structured doesn't make for very compelling film writing. Like, you have to do a bit of adaptation when you're putting something on screen. So, yeah, it's okay. I have one more episode. I'm interested to see how it pans out. But anyway, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Well, for me, so... I've been going through a particularly difficult time in my life because of the strikes that are going on and just trying to figure out what I'm doing with my life in the midst of all of this. So I have been really trying to, I think I said on the last episode or something like that, that I'm going to challenge myself to only watch things that are majority people of color. I don't have the mental capacity to be doing that at the moment. So, quite frankly, I haven't really been watching anything. I've been doing a lot of YouTube because YouTube is short and you can kind of look up anything you want. So if it's like funny compilation of Parks and Rec, Ron Swanson, or like whatever. So I've been doing a lot of YouTube. There was one episode of a show that I watched, which was, I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who might not have seen it.
I really hope it wasn't BoJack Horseman, knowing where your headspace is right now.
It was BoJack Horseman. And also... I don't know if you know this, Geneva, but episode 11 of each season of BoJack Horseman is like the most depressing episode of each season. So this episode happened to be episode 11 of season 3. Anyone who has seen BoJack Horseman knows what I mean when I say that. I did not know what season 3 episode 11 was until I watched it, and I was like, I need to die. This is the most depressing thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I texted my friend who we were watching it together a few months ago, and I was like, I don't think I can keep watching this. This is the most upsetting thing I've ever seen. And they responded, they were like, didn't I tell you not to watch that alone? We were supposed to watch, like, I'm so sorry you're having to go through this alone. I was like,
friends don't let friends watch BoJack Horseman alone.
Specifically season 3, episode 11. Like, this is the episode that everyone is like, don't watch this alone. But I didn't know that. And I'd forgotten that my friend had mentioned that. So, yeah, BoJack Horseman is really really depressing. And season 3, episode 11 is really depressing. And according to my friend, it only gets worse from here. So I might be taking a very long break from this show. It's an incredible show. It really is. It's super profound. It's very well written. It really is a brilliant, brilliant show that touches on just some of the most depressing realities of humanity in a way that is so relatable, in a way that I've never seen in any other show. But that also means it's pretty much torture to watch. And if it's going to get worse from here, I'm like, good God, why would I put
Tatum,
myself through this?
As your friend, I'm going to stage an intervention here and now and say, do not watch any more BoJack Horseman, at least until the strike is over.
Yeah, it's rough because, when you don't know about the show, it's like, oh my gosh, all these pretty colors and bright characters, and it's funny, which it is funny, But then, man, is it not funny.
Sometimes that makes it worse. Sometimes
it really does.
That humor punch in the gut combo can sometimes be the most brutal one of all.
Yeah, I just didn't realize when I pressed play that I was watching an episode 11 episode. So I need to be more conscious of that moving forward. But anyway, after I watched that, I was like, yeah, I'm just doing YouTube from here on out because I just need to laugh. So I've been doing a lot of YouTube. So yeah. Anyway,
I feel like at the end of this episode, after talking about this incredibly brutal and bleak and depressing horror movie, you and I need to just, before we introduce the next episode, just take a minute and tell the audience, give a little recommendation of some episode of a sitcom or a YouTube video that always brings you joy, and just, it'll be our little recommendation corner at the end of this.
Yeah, because this is Halloween. So next week we're also going to be talking about another horror movie that's pretty bleak. So yeah, I like that. Let's recommend something fun at the end.
All right, let's make sure we don't forget. And if we do, we can always cut it out.
That'll help us transition into that headspace of like, oh yeah, something fun. Let's think about something fun.
Yeah.
Let's remember that last week we talked about Spinal Tap. Let's go with that.
Oh yes, that's right. Man, what a whiplash.
I know. Okay, anyway, so like I mentioned, this is kind of our episode that's coming out before Halloween, just to kind of get into a little bit more of like a spooky, horror-y type of
spooky.
Ooh, this movie has no ghosts in it, but still. So yeah, bear with me as I get into just kind of the intro for this film. I didn't realize until I started doing research, there is so much information and trivia that is revolving around this film, because in terms of how it was made, how it was received, the legacy it has on the genre, so many things. So I'm going to read a pretty long introduction here, so stick with us, but I think it's all super interesting. So here we go. So today on the show, we are talking about one of the most influential films in the horror genre, the Texas Chain SAW Massacre. Chainsaw, two separate words. Released in 1974 and directed by Tobe Hooper. The film tells the story of a group of 5 friends on a road trip to visit the grave of one of their grandfathers. When their van runs out of gas, they find themselves stranded at an abandoned house. But little do they know that this house has next-door neighbors. Neighbors who happen to have some pretty horrifying hobbies.
Nice.
Thank you. Though fraught with controversy at the time of its release due to its extreme violence, the Texas Chain SAW Massacre was a success at the box office. It was made with a budget of just $800,000 adjusted for inflation, but the film earned over $150 million adjusted for inflation. So made a lot of money. So due to the film's small budget, the movie was not only seen as controversial for what we see on screen, it's also controversial because of what was happening behind the camera. So with the small amount of money that was available to the production, they were forced to shoot 7-day weeks and 16-hour days for a month in order to reduce equipment costs, which is pretty inhumane, if you ask me. And because they were shooting in Round Rock, Texas in the middle of the summer, the temperatures were dangerously hot. Additionally, Hansen, one of the actors, has said that because there was no money for him to have more than one iteration of his costume, he wore the same shirt and same mask every day of the shoot. So that is the guy who plays Leatherface. He had to wear the same shirt and mask every day for a month.
Can you imagine how that thing smelled by the end of that?
I cannot. Like covered in blood and hardened and gross and ugh.
Deserves an Oscar nomination for that.
Yes. The set was also dangerous due to many of the stunts being done for real. So not really stunts. Burns' finger, who plays Sally, her finger was actually cut so that the grandfather could suck her blood. And a real hammer was also used while her head was over the bucket. And in the scene when Kirk was murdered, the actor who plays him, William Vale, has come out to say that he was terrified that the chainsaw was held within just inches of his face. So this was a very dangerous shoot that there's no way this would happen today, which rightly so should not happen.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
If you read anything about this in your research,
Mm-hmm.
Tobe Tobe Hooper. That's how you pronounce his name. Tobe Hooper.
Mm-hmm.
Tobe Hooper, where was he in his career at this point? Had he been making movies? Was he a successful director? Was he kind of a newer director?
I did not look that up, but I could find it right now. Let me see.
Because I'm actually really curious, like, to have this really small budget and to be able to do all of these things. Yeah, I'm just very curious.
Looks like he had directed...
Looks like a few
shorts. He directed a feature called Eggshells in 1969, and then his next feature was Texas Chainsaw in 1974. So this was his second feature.
So this is his not directorial debut, but certainly the thing that put him on the map.
Yeah. So his set was obviously very dangerous, which I kind of wish I didn't know that watching this movie, because it kind of taints my experience of the film a little bit. I feel like I can't enjoy it as much, but that's what happened, and I felt like I needed to just mention that. But anyway, despite all of this, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre has gone on to be one of the most influential horror films of all time, revolutionizing the concept of a slasher film by introducing the concept of using household tools as murder weapons and having the main killer wear a mask. The tone of suspense and horror that is evoked by the film without depicting much actual violence is also something that many admire. And believe it or not, Hooper was actually hoping for a PG rating for this film by not showing any explicit violence. That obviously didn't work. When the film came out, it was originally given an X rating, and they had to edit it down even more so that they could land at a R rating. I think that's absolutely insane that he thought he could get a PG rating for this by not showing anyone.
Oh, we're going to hang this woman on a meat hook, but, you won't see the hook going into her flesh, so.
PG, for sure.
Yeah. Bring your kids.
Bring your 5-year-old. Who cares?
It's the 70s. Anything goes.
Yeah. Anyway, so... Lastly, Hooper included the sequence at the beginning of the movie stating that this movie is based on true events, though it's not, in order to communicate his feelings about political information that was happening at the time. He was responding to being, quote, lied to by the government about things that were going on all over the world, end quote, such as Watergate, the 1973 oil crisis, and the Vietnam War. And then this last thing I'm going to say is a quote directly from the Wikipedia page, which is also quoting from Hooper himself. So the quote, lack of sentimentality and the brutality of things, unquote, that Hooper noticed while watching the local news, whose graphic coverage was epitomized by, quote, showing brains spilled all over the road, unquote, led to his belief that, quote, man was the real monster here, just wearing a different face. So I, Hooper, put a literal mask on the monster in my film, unquote. So I apologize if that was a lot of disorganized information. But like I said, there was so much information on this. I really had to kind of pick through what I thought were the most essential things to say and order it in whatever way I could. But it probably didn't
that's
make
really
much
fascinating,
sense, so.
actually.
Yeah.
Especially that last part about kind of situating this movie within the sort of the, paranoia and cynicism of the 1970s, and that feeling that everything is kind of breaking down, everything is becoming more brutal, you can't trust anyone. It really makes a lot of sense for the type of person that would make a movie like this.
Yeah, because what type of person would make a movie like this? But yeah, so that is kind of the intro for this. So that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. Geneva, what are your thoughts on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Oh boy. So this is one of those movies where I finished it and I just thought, I have no idea how I'm going to rate this movie.
Geneva, can you actually share a little bit about your relationship to the horror genre in general as well?
Oh, yeah. That's a great idea. Yeah. Yeah. So I am not a horror person historically. I did not really grow up watching horror at all. It was just a genre that had no interest for me. I'm a big old chicken when it comes to jump scares and gore and things like that.
Are you glad I texted you beforehand?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Tatum texted me beforehand and kind of pointed out, here are the two most disturbing things, just so you can be prepared for them. So I did appreciate that a great deal. over the years, I have consciously been trying to get more into horror. I am a lot more interested in the genre now. I've watched some of the kind of foundational horror movies. You know, I've watched Halloween. I've watched Nightmare on Elm Street.
I showed
watched
you
Night of the
Nightmare on
Living
Elm
Dead.
Street.
You did. And it
we
was
watched
great.
that
I
in
really enjoyed
Barcelona
that.
together.
Yeah. Oh, that was great. Yeah. Great night. But yeah, so I'm slowly edging my way into appreciating horror. But it's definitely there's so much variety within horror, which is something I do really appreciate about it. There are many different subgenres within it. The slasher genre is definitely one that's kind of lower on my list of, what I'm interested in when it comes to horror, what I appreciate, that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm coming at this definitely from a horror newbie who is slowly trying to acclimate herself, but does have kind of a lower tolerance for gore, for disturbing things, that sort of thing.
Even though Hannibal is one of your favorite TV shows of all time,
Yeah.
which I still will never understand.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a conundrum, isn't it?
It really is. I don't get
really
it.
is. Yeah.
It's a very
This is the
disturbing
thing.
show.
This is the fascinating thing. Is like I tell people I'm not much of a horror person, but some of my favorite pieces of media of all time are horror.
Mhm.
Hannibal is one. The miniseries The Terror is very much a horror miniseries, and I'll rave about that to anyone who will listen. So the pieces of horror that I love, I really, really do love. So anyway, all that is like context for where I'm coming at watching this movie. And also, like I said, I've been getting into some of the sort of foundational movies that started it all, but are from the 60s and 70s, where I'm like, these things they kicked off are much more brutal. The things from the 60s and 70s themselves are usually not that bad. Like Psycho, like by today's standards, is not really that scary. Halloween from today's standards is not really that scary. So that's the mindset that I have going into it. Now, I will say, I think this movie is really, really well made. I can see why it was so influential. I think the cinematography and the camera work are just really artfully done. I think there are a lot of really beautiful shots in this for a movie that is so violent and grisly. I think the acting is, considering from what I could tell, none of the main characters in this movie really, none of them were really famous. They were actors, but working actors, but none of them had, are really people who went on to be really well known. I think they're very good in their roles, and in particular, Marilyn Burns, who plays Sally. I think she does a really wonderful job handling an extremely difficult role of just basically screaming for 30 minutes
and having
end.
Real hammers almost dropped on her head.
Yeah,
and having her finger sliced open.
And then the final shot where she's like, her screaming has kind of turned into laughing maniacally. Like that's she does great. She really handles that well. So I think that's great. There's so much that is influential about this movie. Just, even just little like shot progressions and elements of the pacing that I saw, like, oh, I can see how that was later used in other horror movies. I can see why this movie was this influential. All of that being said,
did you hate it?
This movie made me sick to my stomach.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
I didn't hate the beginning, but by the time it really started to pick up, by the time it was Marilyn running around for Sally, Marilyn Burns, who plays Sally, running around. Was it
after Franklin died?
40 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
It just, at a certain point, I had to pull up a second screen and kind of divert half of my attention because I was just so sick of what I was seeing and so like disturbed, and it's just brutal, and it's so much brutality against a woman, and in a way that I was just like, I'm not saying it's bad. I think this is a very well made movie, but it is not for me. It's just, I did not feel like I was getting very much out of it. I just felt like I wanted to throw up.
Gotcha.
Which is, I think 100%.
I think that's a pretty legitimate response.
Yeah. And I think 100% what Tobe Hooper was probably trying to achieve from at least some of his audience. So, he did the job. But yeah, it's very much not for me.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for watching it all the way through. Because you didn't have to do that.
Yeah, I'm glad that I have now watched it. I cannot see myself ever watching it again.
Yeah.
But I'm at least glad that I have that sort of grounding in, what this corner of horror can be like. And I'm definitely not tempted to explore any further into other Chainsaw Massacre movies or things.
The other ones aren't very good anyway. So I will say I'm very glad that I had kind of floated the idea to Geneva when we were kind of figuring out what we were going to talk about around Halloween. I kind of floated the idea of of watching Saw. I'm really glad we didn't do that.
I am so glad that we didn't do that.
I don't think I will ever make you watch the movie Saw. Because
thank you. I appreciate that.
Because I feel like Texas Chainsaw Massacre goes very much so for like a gritty, like horrifying indie way of approaching this, whereas Saw it definitely like has a low budget and all of that, but it's a little bit more so of like horror for entertainment. And I think that would really, really not work for you, having all of this violence, but like not that you're watching, you're like, oh man, like this is super entertaining, but it does have like twists and turns. I'm like, oh wow, that was unexpected and blah blah blah. So yeah, I would not recommend you ever watching the movie Saw, and I will not make you watch it for this podcast.
Yeah, very much so. Like, because with this movie, it's grisly, it's bleak, it's cynical, it's horrifying. But I do feel there is artistry there. I feel like there's something being said, even if that thing being said is a very nihilistic, angry statement. And even with that, there were parts where I was like, I feel like this is just exploitative. How long this is going on, how long we have to see this poor woman just sit there and be tortured. This, like, I feel like I'm participating in something that is ugly and gross, And so I worry with other movies that kind of took that ball and ran with it, that the artistry would disappear, and that feeling of I'm just participating in a snuff film or something like that would increase.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you in that, like, in my opinion, and this is not me hating on like people who love horror movies, because I live in Chicago. I don't really I've never really understood this, but the city of Chicago has a huge population of people that are obsessed with horror. Like, they're just people who love horror movies. And I have lots of friends that I work with or that I'm just friends with that love horror movies. It's like their thing. And so I don't want to like discount those people. But for me, slasher films are not necessarily my go-to. And I do think like there are a lot of movies that just have the slasher aspect without the artistry behind it. But I think that this movie, it does have artistry behind it, in my opinion. So that's why I'm able to kind of tolerate it a little bit more. And Saw also does have artistry, in my opinion. The first one anyway. Even though it does have entertainment to it as well. And one of the best twists in cinema of all time, in my opinion. But yeah, okay, cool. Well, that's actually good for me to know, because that changes the way that I will kind of approach talking about this movie, because I don't want to make you sick and I don't want to make you dwell on things that might not be helpful for you.
Thank you. I will do my best, but yeah. It was one of those movies you finish it and you just feel like, all right, I need to like wash my brain out. I need to sit and watch something completely mindless and stupid and just disconnect from the world at large.
I would highly recommend you watch season 3 episode 11 of no, don't do that. But yeah, so okay, thank you for watching it. So as far as my relationship to this movie, so my story is actually kind of similar to Geneva's a little bit, in the sense that growing up, horror was not my thing. I grew up in a household where it was like, this is demonic. Do not watch these things, which some of them are literally demonic because it's about demons. So it was something that I never really got into growing up. And I had this perspective of movies are either like really, really dark, scary things that are evil, or they're just dumb popcorn entertainment. That was my belief of horror movies for a very long time. And I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but a few years ago, I had this really long list that I made of like all the movies that I thought I had to see in order to consider myself a film person. And I had several horror films on that list because I'd never really watched horror. And so this was one of them. This was probably one of the first ones that I watched on that list because it's known to be one of the best horror movies of all time. So I was like, I might as well start with the best. And I watched this movie and I was like, whoa, I really need to start watching more horror movies. Because I'd never watched horror movies before, I was just like, I've never seen anything like this. This is really disturbing, but in a way that makes me look at life in an interesting, weird way that I've never looked at it before. And so I really not enjoyed. I was very taken aback by this film the first time I watched it.
Hard to say this is a movie you enjoyed. It's one of those movies where you're like, I need to find a different way to phrase this.
Yeah, like I was taken aback by it. I was very drawn into the story and the dynamics of, because I thought it was just going to be, a bunch of people getting killed by some dude with a chainsaw, but I didn't expect the family aspect and the mental illness aspect of it, of this is a generational thing. We have a grandfather, we have a father, we have two sons, we have all of these different things. And I think that that's really where it sounds like for you, that's when the movie started to turn you off a little bit. Whereas for me, that was when I was like, oh, this is something different. This isn't just like people running around getting killed. This is actually like a commentary on just people. And it felt more real to me, as opposed to like, this is a fantasy world where people get killed and they scream because, oh my gosh, the cliche of everyone shows up and then they disappear one by one and the blonde girl's left at the end. It added another aspect to it that I very much so was interested in, because it took it from just being violent for violence sake to being disturbing and interesting. So, and similar to what you said, I think it's like it's shot in a very interesting way. It was shot on film, but like not the standard 35 millimeter film, because they wanted to save money. So they used a cheaper type of film. I think that the way that it builds tension is really masterful. I think it plays into that, I hate to call it a trope because that sounds, like diminutive. Is that a word? It sounds like,
yeah, diminutive.
Yeah. But like it definitely plays into that horror, journey of like, don't do it. Why are you going in there? Don't do the thing. Like,
Well, it's funny. I'd seen Cabin in the Woods years ago, which has that scene, where all the friends pull up at a gas station in their van to get gas right before they're about to head off to the cabin in the woods. And the old man's like, don't go there. And I was like, oh, that's where that comes from.
Yeah. And so I feel like this movie from the very beginning, it's just like left and right. Like, don't pick up the hitchhiker. Don't go to this house. Don't go inside the house. Don't go to the neighbor's house. Don't go inside of the neighbor's house. Like, don't leave the van. Don't go running into the forest. Like, all of these different things. And I thought that I love when horror movies are able to be horrifying without showing how horrifying, like without showing the actual horror. And I feel like this movie really builds up to showing the horror later on. And I don't know. I just think that the writing and the pacing and the structure of the story is just really well done, in a way that I admire. I think it's very concise. It's told in less than an hour and a half, and you're told exactly what you need to be told, and you see exactly what you need to see, and nothing more, nothing less, in my opinion. So yeah, I don't know. I really like this movie a lot. I think it's definitely not a movie that I'm gonna like watch all the time, but I admire the craft of it, even though hearing about the production of it was terrible. I don't admire that at all. But I think it came together in a way that, I don't know, for me as someone who like loves, you know, seeing indie films that are made on a very small budget, but they tell very enticing stories. I think that this movie does a very good job of that in a genre that often can be very, I don't know, not as satisfying and engaging. So yeah.
Yeah, it is fascinating how often I feel like a lot of these sort of genre redefining horror movies are indie movies that are made on a small budget and perform way over their expectations. Like you think of, as you were reading those numbers, I was thinking of the Blair Witch Project from like 1999 and how that was a shoestring budget made by, you know, people basically right out of film school, just, you know, actors who are just up and coming in the business trying to get somewhere. And what they created was a huge cultural phenomenon that completely redefined how horror movies are made. You know, there's just that something about that low to the ground desperation and passion and creativity and like need to be really ingenious about the way you use your resources that can sometimes spark really brilliance and create something really original in the horror genre.
Make horror movies low budget again. That would actually be a fun Letterboxd list to make of like groundbreaking horror movies made on small budgets. Like Jaws would be on there, Under the Skin would be on there, Nightmare on Elm Street, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Blair Witch Project, like that would be an interesting list to make.
I mean, a lot of like the A24 horror movies, right? The sort of elevated horror movies are kind of fit within that as well. Or something like The Babadook, you know, these things that are very much indie projects that suddenly blow up and get all this attention.
I wonder what the budget for Rosemary's Baby was. Anyway, yeah. So, yeah. And just kind of going with the, you know, the tension of the movie and the pacing of it. 'Cause I don't know if you sense the same thing. Maybe you said this and I just forgot, but did you have a feeling that like the pacing of the movie and the way that it built was really well? Because I feel like from the very beginning, it establishes this concept of like, we kind of know what we're getting into because we see this body kind of in this field. And then we hear this radio broadcast over these credits of this guy talking about like, there's this town and people are disappearing and we don't know what's happening. And then that transitions us into the van because they're listening to it in the van. And, you know, from the very beginning, we have this kind of formidable sort of feeling. And then it just, I don't know. For me, I felt like it really did a good job of starting somewhere and slowly building. I don't know if that connected with you at all, but.
Yeah. I mean, like what you'd mentioned earlier about Hooper, sort of, you know, that 1970s cynicism that we were talking about, that idea that the world is all bad and everything is falling apart and, you know, violence and brutality are everywhere. Situating it with those news stories is such a brilliant way to set that scene, because it's news stories from all over the world. Like they're talking about, you know, violence broke out here and these bodies were discovered here. And then it starts to center on here. And here's the local thing that happened, which is these not only are people disappearing, but also these, like, I guess bodies have been dug up out of the cemetery and desecrated and turned into this horrific monument. And so, you know, we're starting off with this idea of this incredibly unsettling idea of, you know, I guess desecration is kind of the word for it, but this idea that, you know, this horror, these norms are being broken and there is some sort of evil at play that is, you know, there's madness at play. You know, you can't really understand why, it's just happening and there's no explanation, and all of a sudden the most horrifying thing you've ever seen before happens. And that then continues when they pick up the hitchhiker, which was just such an effective way to set the scene early on before there's any actual deaths. Is just they pick up a hitchhiker they're a little bit divided on it.
Which you
so
already know
fine.
they shouldn't do.
Yeah, I mean, bad idea. Like, I'm amazed that hitchhiking culture lasted as long as it did. But he's just immediately like the weirdest, creepiest guy you've ever seen before. Just the way he talks, the way he sits, the way he's like all jumping from topic to topic. And
well, I think some of them even said, they were like, he looks crazy. Like, don't pull over.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
You know, he keeps pulling out talking about how his family used to be in meat or something like that, and like pulling out all these photos of like
but also Franklin is super into it in a way that's really freaky. He's like, my family was into this too, like blah. I'm like, dude, what?
Yeah, like getting again into the sort of generational theming to what we can talk about a little bit later. But you know, and like I feel like, you know, as a woman, I've definitely been in this circumstance, and I think a lot of people, but especially women, can be in this circumstance where you're like, you're in a situation and your alarm bells are going off, and it could be fine, but it could take a turn for the worse. And then it takes a turn for the worse, and you're like, oh gosh, how do I get out of the situation? And I mean, in my situation, it ended up being fine. But in this situation,
it wasn't a chainsaw massacre.
Yeah, he did not suddenly plunge a penknife into his hand. But that's what happens here. Is like all of a sudden he just starts cutting open his hand, and everyone is just like shocked. Like, what do we do? Like the most disturbing, freaky thing that, you know, every norm is being violated is happening in front of you, and he's just acting like that's the most normal thing in the world. And
they
like,
still don't let him out until he cuts Franklin. I'm like, why are you guys waiting? So you guys are the most.
I mean, I would have kicked him out of that van a long time before we even got.
I wouldn't have let him in the van.
No.
Once he took a picture of them, it's like everyone's like, that's kind of weird.
No. That's yeah. No,
I did really like, though, again, kind of returning back to what I was saying before, this idea of how this film does such a good job. It does a really good job of kind of foreshadowing things that are to come. And I think that there's things that I was noticing this time around on rewatch that I didn't necessarily pick up on before, you know, because we have the opening sequence of, like the first things that we see in the film are a bunch of photographs of these body parts, of like decaying body parts, which kind of helps us make that connection that when he's taking the photo of them, this somehow is going to relate to these photos of these like decaying body parts. And then also after he cuts his hand and he gets out of the van, when he puts his hand on the van, I'm like, oh, he's marking it. Like he is marking that van. And I didn't make that connection last time. And so I think that it's just really well done how from the very beginning, it's giving you all of these puzzle pieces that you can use to kind of put together to have everything all click into place later. Yeah, I think it's great how the story is just structured. I think it's great.
Yeah. They spend so much time looking at the mark, the bloody mark on the van, and trying to figure out, is it some sort of symbol? Like, does it mean something? When really, I think all that it means, like you said, is that it's been marked. You know, the fact that the blood is on there is what is significant.
Well, you even see that when they pull up to the gas station that has no fucking gas. Like, what? One of the guys comes out and is washing the car. He washes the whole van except for that spot, which is really like, oh no. Like, wow, you really need to make sure that this mark is distinct. You got to be able to see it. But yeah, and kind of just like going from there in terms of just the structure and the pacing, I think it's really great how it takes so long for us to get to that first killing. Because this movie is not very long. Like I said, it's an hour and 20 minutes. And it takes us about like 30 minutes to get to that first
killing.
Possibly
even more. Like, it really felt to me like the first killing doesn't happen until halfway through the movie. I'm probably wrong about that.
But speeds through
and
after that.
But yeah, it's just like absolutely just train out of control from there.
Yeah.
You know?
So I want to talk about that first killing too, though, because it's kind of a very famous scene. Like if you go on the internet or YouTube and you look up like Texas Chainsaw Massacre scene, this is the one that comes up.
Yeah. Before we talk about that, should we maybe set up some of the characters and the dynamics between them?
Sure, we can.
Because we talked briefly about Franklin, and obviously we'll talk a lot about Sally, but their brother and sister Franklin is in a wheelchair. He's disabled. And there's this sort of tension in the group where it seems like these are Sally's friends and they were going to go on this road trip. And then Franklin sort of somehow ended up getting roped in. And there is that sort of, he feels kind of out of place. They feel like he's out of place. They're all friendly toward each other, but there's kind of simmering stuff going on. But there's also all this talk that happens, mostly from Franklin, I think, from what I remember, about how he and Sally's family owns this big house in the area, and their grandparents used to be in meat, and like that.
So
that
weird
theme of like butchery, butchering animals, butchering cattle, chickens, whatever it is just a huge theme throughout this movie, like visually and also just in terms of literally what the killers in this family are doing is this kind of twisted reinterpretation of what Sally and Franklin's family used to do.
Yeah, and I guess, again, tying that into the structure a little bit and just like the foreshadowing and the tension of how things are paced and organized, I think it's really interesting that Franklin kind of goes off on this really creepy, monologue about the violence and how he was so intrigued by the butchering that their grandparents did, that when they get to this big house, you think that that's where the violence is going to happen. It's like, oh man, like once they walk through there, but then you realize later on that it's not actually that house, it's the neighbors next door. And so it's even further prolonging and building this tension of like, oh, it's not happening yet. Oh, it's not happening. When's it going to happen? And I think that it's just like another, the fact that he has that whole monologue just like adds on to the, just the tension that builds.
Yeah. There's so much tension as they're walking through and exploring this mansion. And, there is one real sign that something is out of place when Franklin comes upon this creepy, like, pile of bones outside of the door, and then he looks up and there's like this dangling bone monument, so someone has been there to kind of mark their spot. But other than that, it's a decaying mansion that used to be like, clearly the house of the wealthiest people in the land, and it's just completely fallen into disrepair. And it's just a spot for these young kids to kind of come and sort of play act I don't know, exploring and talk about what their lives used to be like back when their family had money. But it's very innocent in the way that they're kind of exploring it, not realizing what's about to happen.
Yeah. So then Pam and Kirk, they're like, oh, look at that house over there. Let's go get some gas from them. And we're all
mistake number one.
Yeah. We're all like, don't go. You're in the middle of nowhere. It's a stranger. No, don't do it. But they go anyway.
That was really mistake number one, if we're being honest. No, mistake number one is picking up the hitchhiker. There are many mistakes for me.
Mistake number one was them I think someone says it at some point. It might be Sally. They were like, we should have gotten gas beforehand so we didn't get stuck out here. That's like rule number one of road trips. When I drove to Montana, we were like, if we hit half a tank of gas, we're going to fill up because we don't know when we're going to see the next gas station. But yes. So yeah, then Kirk and Pam, they wander over to the neighbor's house because they're like, hey, maybe they have some gas that can help us. I think it's very interesting. Again, kind of the foreshadowing that they walk over and they see all of these cars. There's all of these cars, and it's like they're kind of
graveyard of cars, you might say.
Yeah, and they kind of don't really think about it. They're just like, oh, look, that's a lot of cars. Let's go on. Doop de doop de doop. And
all of these cars, by the way, which seem to be covered with this sort of almost military netting that's like camouflaged, as if they're afraid of, I don't know, satellites overhead could take overhead photos. I was kind of struck by that because I don't know if you were really paranoid about that yet in the 70s. Obviously we are now with Google Maps and everything, but I just thought that was interesting.
Or it could just be a tarp that they put up that happened to look like that. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It could have been a thematic thing that Hooper put in there specifically to reference, wars that were happening at the time. But anyway, so yeah, they get to the house and we have this iconic, well-known opening sequence where Kirk walks into the house. And of course, we have this long sequence of, hello, is anyone in here? Hello, is anyone in here? It's like, there's no one here. Turn around. Stop. It's like, maybe if I go deeper into the house, I'll find somebody. Maybe if I walk through this doorway into a very dark red room with all of these animal carcasses on the wall, I'll find the person who lives back here and they can give me gas for my vehicle. And then obviously
I should just say, this was the first moment where I had the thought, these kids are just trespassing in someone's home. Like,
Yes. They definitely are. So
the killers are really just practicing self-defense. Like.
Exactly. I would say that they succeeded in that.
Oh gosh.
But yeah, so then as he walks through this, this doorway, Leatherface, we see him for the first time as just this kind of massive Hulk almost of a man. He just comes out and he hits him on the head with this hammer, and Kirk just drops to the ground. And then he starts kind of flopping like a fish, which is
flailing around. It's so disturbing.
Which is calling back to the things that Franklin was describing in the car about when they would kill animals. They'd be like, oh yeah, we'd hit them once, but it wouldn't be enough. So we'd have to hit him a second time. And it's kind of a connection to what Franklin was saying before. And then after Leatherface kind of drives him back into the room, we have this, in my opinion, I think it's the most terrifying moment of the movie when he slams this door shut. He the force with which he pulls this metal door shut is so frightening that the introduction to this character of just, he kind of nonchalantly hits this guy over the head in a way that's just like, oh yeah, I'm going to hit this guy in the head and drag him into this room, whatever. But then violently shuts this door. It kind of establishes this concept of, oh, this person is very kind of unstable and all over the place and not really in regulation of their emotions, because they can go from being kind of disconnected to then being super angry from like at the snap of, or I don't know what phrase I'm thinking of, but like, it just can automatically switch from one thing to another. And I think it's just an incredible introduction to this character. It is terrifying the way he shuts that door. My God, I'm like, oh, this is really scary.
Yeah. And the production design too, and the sort of I'm not thinking of the word, but the weird disconnect between the sort of crumbling Victorian dark wood, it looks like a house. It looks like a crumbling Victorian house of the stairs and the hallway, and then the clean metal of this door. And it looks like, like a cattle car or something like that is being shut. Like the weird juxtaposition between those two is just so effective in like, oh, this house it's a trap and it's a factory for, the production of meat in this, really secretive, furtive, horrifying way.
Yeah. So then from here, I think we can kind of just like snowball until we get into the final sequence with Sally. But basically after this, we have Pam, who kind of gets to a point where she's like, okay, Kirk's been in the house for a while. Maybe I should go like find him and see what's going on. So then we have yet another sequence of her walking around. Hello, is anybody here? Kirk, hello? It's like, turn around. So then she walks into this room and she collapses onto the ground. She sees all of these different, which, oh my gosh, we have such long sequences of this camera just kind of showing all of these different bones and structures that are built out of the bones all around this room. We have a live chicken that's in a cage. We have this like couch throne built out of like, femurs and human bones, and there's spines all over the place and skulls and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
And like feathers and...
If you're familiar with the true crime story of Ed Gein, who is kind of the inspiration for Psycho, like the original
also
inspiration
Silence
for
of the
Psycho.
Lambs.
Yeah. I would assume that it's probably partly inspired by that.
It is. Yeah. That killer inspired this one, Silence of the Lambs and Psycho, which you can kind of see similarities between all three of them. But yeah, so she basically is so freaked out that she kind of doesn't even register that she can get up and leave almost. So then she ends up finding herself in the hands of Leatherface in a really, really awful sequence where he brings her into this back room and he literally hangs her on a hook that from the ceiling. And in front of her is Kirk on the table, who I think he's already dead, which gives me a little bit of comfort. He's already dead and he gets chopped up by Leatherface. I'm not going to go into gruesome detail about it.
Yeah, but poor Pam is like, she's still alive. She's on this hook and she's watching it all and she's begging and crying. And yeah, this was the moment where I was just like, oh no, this is...
Yeah.
Well, actually, the moment that they picked up the hitchhiker was really the moment where I was like, oh no, I'm gonna have some problems with this movie.
Yeah, and then eventually we find out that, which this is another one of the most scary sequences for me, because for me it's like a worst nightmare, which like, I mean, all of this is a worst nightmare, but there is a moment when Jerry then comes looking for them, and before Leatherface registers that Jerry is actually in the home, Jerry makes his way into that back room and kind of sees what's going on. And Pam is like trying to get out of the freezer, which is horrifying to me, that she's stuck in a freezer freezing to death. Like and so Jerry opens it and Pam like flings out of this freezer and she's like flailing or whatever. And then Leatherface hears that she's screaming and then he comes in and he also kills Jerry. So 3 people are now dead. Super fun.
There's this moment where Leatherface, like after he kills Jerry, he kind of looks around and he's like,
where'd he go?
Well, to me, it more read like, shit, like now what do I do? You know, where it's like this moment of like 3 people, like I thought it was just the 2, but the third one kept coming. Are there more, you know, out there? And then it's like, well, now we got to go find out if there are more people who are going to keep coming because we have to, you know, keep our domain preserved.
Yeah, totally. So,
which again, I'm like, these guys are trespassing in this guy's house. Like, no, just kidding.
Yeah. So Geneva's don't ever break into Geneva's home is what she's saying.
I've got a chainsaw. I keep it under my pillow.
Yeah. So yeah, after this kind of continuing the snowballing. So then we have Sally and Franklin. After a while, they've kind of been waiting for their friends to come back. And at this point, the sun is going down until it's dark. And they're just like, what do we do? Like, do we go looking for them? And then Sally keeps insisting.
They had this really nice kind of very sibling-y argument about, you know, Franklin's like, you didn't want me to come, did you? And Sally's like, just shut up. We're just gonna wait. And I don't know. We get so little of the relationship between the two, but the moments of brother-sisterliness that we see kind of just add to the tragedy of it all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then their argument kind of continues because Sally is insisting, I'm going to go look for them. We can't just stay here. But Franklin's like, I have to come with you. I'm not going to let you go alone. But then Sally's like, I can't push you through the fields. Like, you have to stay here and I'm going to go. He's like, but we have to stay together. And then she's like, well, basically she gets to a point where she's like, well, fuck it. I'm just going to go. And then Franklin, being the good brother that he is like, well, I'm going to have to figure out a way to come after you because I'm not letting you go alone. So he starts going with her into the grass over to this house to see if they can find the others. They don't get very far because then Leatherface finds them and pretty much immediately kills Franklin because Franklin can't really run or
fully
get away.
Stabs him with a chainsaw like
he
multiple
does.
times.
Yes, he does. I mean, I'm trying not to be graphic, Geneva, for your sake, but I can start to describe the killings if you want.
I'm sorry, I can be less graphic.
I mean, I don't care. I'm just trying to be sensitive to you. But yeah, so Leatherface kills Franklin, which then begins the extremely long sequence of Sally running and screaming for the remaining 30, it's not even 30 minutes. It's like 20 to 25 minutes, but it feels like it's forever.
It feels like an eternity.
Yes. So I will say this whole sequence of him kind of chasing her around in the forest before she gets to the gas station, I think is horrifying, but also I think part of the reason that it's horrifying is the way that it is edited together, because I think that a lot of it is we see Sally running and she's running and then she's falling and then she's getting up, and sometimes Leatherface is like right on her tails, but then other times he's farther away, but you still hear the chainsaw, and the chainsaw is quieter and then louder, and so like the sound of this chainsaw is really such a great way for us to know how close she is to death, basically, without necessarily seeing Leatherface. But then there are some shots where we do see him right behind her, and the way that it's shot makes it feel like he's right on top of her. Like he is right there, and he's kind of this silhouette, but he's lit just enough that you can like see his face and see the chainsaw. Like it's just so, I think it's so artfully shot and edited together in such a way that makes it way more horrifying than it would otherwise be. Because it could have just been some guy chasing her around while she screams with a chainsaw. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that's kind of scary. But the way that this is put together, I think, is just so masterfully done to be able to create this sense of horror, you know, in the audience members. So I don't know. I know that obviously this is when it started to get really hard for you, but do you connect with that at all in terms of like just how it's shot and put together? Do you see it as masterful? Because I think it's so well done.
Yeah, this is the part where I really started to dip back in and out with my full attention. Gotcha. So, you know, it wasn't that I wasn't watching, but I maybe was not watching as fully.
Okay, gotcha.
Some other parts.
That's valid. So then again, like not playing with, but commenting on the structure and the tension of this film, I think it's so great that just when we all know that we're getting to the climax of this film, we have this moment of relief of just my goodness. Just like, oh my gosh, just give me a second to breathe, please. Like, I need a minute. And the movie does such a good job of, you know, at least in my opinion, when she gets to the gas station, we know that it isn't over. But at the same time, in my viewing of it, even though we know it isn't over, I don't initially know that this man she's bumping into is a bad guy. He seems like a good guy, but when he leaves, and obviously we have this, in my opinion, incredible shot of just the door being open for a very long time, because, sorry, I'm kind of speaking round and about, but she barely escapes Leatherface. He's like he's like on top of her heels. And then she gets into this door and all of a sudden it's quiet. We don't see him anymore. Anything. It's like he just disappeared out of thin air. Or yeah. But then, you know, we have the old man kind of walk out, and then it's just this pitch black door, complete silence. She's kind of like, okay, am I safe? Am I not safe? She really doesn't know, but you can tell she wants to feel relieved, but she can't.
And her acting here again is
so
incredible. Good. The jerky way that she moves her head as she is looking around the room, like you can tell she's in shock. Her adrenaline is just completely through the roof. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah. And then, which, talking about good acting performances, in my opinion, I was completely blown away. The old man comes back after the truck backs up, and his face has transformed. Before, when we see him, he seems kind of like, oh, he's maybe a normal dude. Yeah, this is a weird place, but he could probably maybe be a normal guy. But then he comes back in and his face is contorted. He looks like a maniacal, insane murderer person. And that transformation, I think, is just so well done. And then all of us, and then I'm like, okay, here we go. Take a deep breath. We're going right back in it. Okay, cool. Thanks for those 60 seconds.
There's that great pan as I think it's as she's waiting still, he's not yet come back, where she's looking around the room and just kind of registering all the sort of, you know, normal things that you would expect to find in a person's home. And then she just looks over at the stove and there is so much meat being roasted. And, some of it is clearly like sausages and things like that, but some of it's pretty undefinable. And you're like, I don't know what this is. And I think that's the moment where she starts to realize, oh no, something is wrong.
Yes. So he comes back with a rope and a sack, being a typical creepy murderer who's like, don't worry, it's going to be fine. Just come over here. It's like, oh my gosh. So he ends up taking her back to the farmhouse. And this is when we really start to understand. I think we all kind of knew that the hitchhiker was somehow related to this. But this is when we start to really realize, oh, this is a family. Like, this is a father and this is two sons. But then I actually forgot this. I forgot that there was a grandfather. And so I'm watching this and I'm like, and they tell him to go get grandpa. And I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. And we all think he's just like they've been keeping this dead person in a chair for a long time. But then we realize, oh no, he's alive. Like, we don't know what's wrong with him. Anyone who looks like that should be dead. I don't know how he's still alive. Doesn't matter. It's terrifying.
Well, and it's funny because there had been multiple references to Dracula early in the movie. Franklin had talked about, I think that the hitchhiker, I think, had looked like Dracula. When they pull up at the abandoned house, they talk about how it looks like something Bela Lugosi lived in or something like that. But now this grandpa is literally sucking the blood out of this woman. Like, he literally lives on blood.
So basically they bring grandpa downstairs for dinner time, and the thing that grandpa gets to eat is Sally's blood. They cut her finger. He sucks on it for quite a long time. And then she blacks out, and then she wakes up again, and she is sitting at the head of the table. And, the father and the two sons, they kind of have this family spat, but in a way that mass murderers have a family spat, basically. And they end up having... Your typical
mass murderer family spat.
Right. And they end up having this really interesting argument, in my opinion, where the sons are basically telling their dad, like, you don't do any of the hard work. You're just the chef. You just cook the food. We're the ones that have to do all the hard work. And so they end up having this really interesting, in my opinion, argument where they're kind of figuring out, like, who's actually the one in power here? Who's the one that has the ranking? But very clearly, because he's the dad and these two sons are mentally ill, and who knows what their father has done to them have this sort of relationship, because they're both so dangerous to others. But once this figure is in the room, the two of them become like puppy dogs, which almost terrifies me more than anything. I'm like, what did this man do to these people to make them have this relationship with him and behave in this way towards others? But then we learned that the grandfather was the best killer of them all. And so they're like, well, let's let him kill Sally. Let's watch him do it. And before that happens, we have this really kind of like disgustingly beautiful shot of Sally's eyes. Her eyeballs are kind of flittering around the room, and we have these extreme close-ups of her pupils and this bright green. I don't necessarily have a thematic interpretation as to why the film does that, or if there's a deeper meaning. But I just thought it was worth mentioning that we have a pretty, long instance where we have shots of her eyes.
Yeah, I don't know too, and it was very disturbing to me.
Yeah. So I would just like to say that throughout all of this, she's just screaming. She is constantly screaming. Yep. Constantly screaming.
Non-stop screaming.
Non-stop screaming. I mean,
and
she
when
already
she's not
has
screaming,
been, but...
she's begging for her life, as anyone would in that situation.
Yes. So basically, they pull her over to the end of the table because they're going to have the grandfather kill her because he's the best killer of them all. And Leatherface gives the grandfather a hammer while she's bent over a bucket so that he can hit her in the head and kill her. And it's this long extended sequence where he keeps trying to hit her in the head, but he can't do it because he keeps missing. It's falling on the floor. It's falling in the bucket. All of these different things.
175 years old.
Yeah. / a zombie. Like, I don't know.
I don't know what's going on.
But so through the circumstance of this, the hitchhiker's son, he ends up getting frustrated. He's like, all right, grandpa, like, give me the hammer. You can't do it. I'm the one who's the best at this. Give me the hammer. And so in the process of him letting go of Sally to take the hammer, she manages to get loose enough that she can run. So she runs out of the house screaming. And Leatherface continues to chase after her with the chainsaw yet again. At this point, the sun has started to rise. So she's been stuck with these men for a very long time. She's gone through the night with them, and now the sun is rising. So she makes it out to the street, and Leatherface is still chasing her around. And yet again, when he gets very close to, being on top of her, there's this truck that comes and, well, actually, no, the truck hits the hitchhiking brother first. So,
oh yeah, that's right. Fully runs over him too.
Yes.
I was like, how did they film that? It's a pretty impressive effect.
I feel like a lot of their budget probably went to getting that dummy. But yeah, so the hitchhiker brother gets run over first, then the truck driver stops, and then he stops, and Sally's running towards him, and then the truck driver recognizes, oh, there's a man with a chainsaw chasing after you. Whatever will we do? And so,
gotta say, this truck driver, what a champ.
So I will say I was a little bit confused. I'm like, you could have just started the truck and driven away as opposed to going out the other side, but whatever. This is a horror movie. I will also say that, this is just a common issue I have with horror movies, and there's a reason it's become a trope and a joke. I just don't like that he's a black man and he just gets killed right away.
Wait, he gets killed?
Yeah. No. Okay. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. Hold on.
Okay.
We'll get there. But yes, thank you for correcting me.
I thought his fate was uncertain. I thought we don't see whether he or not he gets killed.
Yes. So I'm going to get to that. Thank you for bringing that up. So basically, like, the two of them get into the truck, but they can't fully, like, drive away for whatever reason. So then they get out of the truck on the other side, and Leatherface is still chasing after them. But then another pickup truck pulls up, and Sally manages to get into the back of this pickup truck, and they start driving away. And she is still screaming because she's been constantly screaming. But then as they get further and further away from Leatherface, she does her screaming does kind of transform into, I think it's still screaming, but it's like scream laughing.
It's like hysterical laughter.
Yeah.
It's like she is not in control of anything that she's doing.
Yeah. It's just like, I'm terrified. I'm in shock. I'm relieved. I'm confused. I'm physically exhausted, like all of the things at once, which I think is just a really great performance. But on top of that, I think that in a weird way, this shot of her sitting in the back of the truck is very beautiful. Her like the lighting of where the sun is at, with the color of the faint kind of bright blue truck, with this blood on her face and the way she's lit from behind. It really is kind of this beautiful shot, in my opinion. And then we cut back to Leatherface, and he's kind of just furiously waving his chainsaw around.
In another really beautiful shot where he's sort of silhouetted against the rising sun and the fields in the distance. And yeah, he's just kind of like frustratedly, like sort of waving that chainsaw around.
Yeah. Yeah. So all of that being said, I wanted to talk a little bit about the ending, if you're willing to engage with it, because for me, the first time I watched this movie, I was very unhappy with the ending because I was like, we've had this whole movie building up to this thing, and we've established how terrifying and how dangerous this family is. And she just like is able to get free and run out of the house. And then a truck happens to pull up. Like, has this never happened before, that like trucks go by and people run out? Like, because seemingly they've killed hundreds of people. So how has this never happened before? Or like, it seemed like yesterday this wasn't a busy road, which is why they were stuck. And now in the course of 5 minutes, we have 2 vehicles going by. Like, I was very unsatisfied with the ending the first time I saw this, because I felt like it was a very quick resolution in a way that just didn't make sense. And I'm like, oh, she just got away. Like, I don't get it. And I think this time around, I did read it a little bit differently. I'm still not fully satisfied with the ending because I'm still kind of, I don't think it's consistent with the story to all of a sudden at the end have these vehicles going by and they weren't there yesterday. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. But I will say this time around, I didn't see the ending as a happy ending. The first time I was like, oh, look, she's free and now she gets to go away. And this time around, I was like, oh, she might have gotten away, but what happens to that guy who was left behind? And is she actually getting away? Because this time around, I was like, oh, maybe the unlikelihood of this happening and that truck pulling up, maybe she actually didn't get away, because we see a pickup truck earlier that like the father backs up in. And I'm like, maybe she didn't actually get away. Maybe they're driving the truck that she just hopped back into. And so for me, I found the ending to be a little bit less dissatisfying this time because it felt like this isn't a happy ending. The story continues.
Yeah. Well, we never see the face of the pickup truck driver.
Mm-hmm.
I think intentionally so. She gets into it. It slows down enough for her to stop, but we don't see the human behind the wheel making that decision. And so my interpretation of it is, I don't think it's necessarily a part of the family of killers. I think it is just a passerby, but I think there is a level of commentary in the sense that just being picked up by a random man does not mean you're safe. Like, if you're a woman, who knows who this man is or what he could do to her, assuming that it's a man, but it seems like it is. And at one point earlier in the story, she thought she'd found safety with a seemingly normal looking man, and that turned out to be a horrifying experience that just put her back where she, was before. So even if this man is not part of that family of killers, it does not mean that she's safe. There is this ambiguity that it ends on. She could be safe, but also the cycle could continue.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's why I was able to I guess tolerate the ending a little bit more this time. I was like, this is not a clean cut, all right, she got away. It's more so like, nah, this story isn't over. Yeah. Like, we don't know where it's going. We don't know if it's going to follow her or if it's going to follow the truck driver or both of them, but this story is not over.
Yeah. It weirdly really reminded me, this is a very different movie in a very different genre. So it's only the idea of being picked up at the very end by a faceless driver in a pickup truck that you never see and you don't really know where they're going to or if this person has good intentions or not.
Driving Miss Daisy?
I have not seen Driving Miss Daisy. No, it reminded me to the end of My Own Private Idaho. Have you ever seen that movie?
No.
Highly recommend. I think you would find it really interesting. It's a River Phoenix. Anyway, we can talk about it later. But yeah, great movie. But that sort of ambiguity about the ending and about the intentions of the faceless driver allows you to kind of read many different possible paths that the story could take afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that's the ending of the movie. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think this movie is great. I think it's very well made. It looks great. Like I said before, it doesn't show more than you need to. It doesn't show less than you need to. It just shows exactly the right amount. I think it's a masterclass of structure and building tension. I think that the dynamic between the father, the grandfather, and these two sons is incredibly fascinating. That scene where they're at the table and she's just screaming for a really long time. I don't know. I just think it's interesting to step into the lives of what are the lives of these people? Because I think it sounds like you, and rightfully so, I think a lot of other people as well, they're very focused on how is Sally being treated or how is Sally interacting with this experience that's going on. Whereas for me, especially on the second viewing, I'm just fascinated by the dynamic of this family. Like, this is what they do, like, every day or on the regular. Like, what I don't know. I want to learn more about them and what their lives look like on the day to day, and do they ever get along? What does that look like? You know, do they ever fight each other, and what does that look like? And I don't know. I just think it's super fascinating. Like, is this a routine where they carry grandfather upstairs every morning and bring him downstairs every night? It just feels like an introduction to a whole other world. And Sally's a part of it for just a little bit. But this world goes on and on and on. And I don't know. I'm just really intrigued by it. I don't know what that says about me, but, you know, I'm not really a huge serial killer, true crime person. Like, I'm not someone who's obsessed with serial killers like a lot of other people are. But I think in this instance, I just find it to be really intriguing. Like, who are these people? And getting to see them in their element, not just as these monsters running around killing people, but as them, like, in their calm, normal state, or at least as calm and normal as they can be, I guess. I just find it fascinating. I really like that. I mean, I don't like that sequence, but it's just so intriguing to me to kind of see them in their own world just having dinner, you know? It's this weird juxtaposition of it is the worst moment in this woman's life and the most mundane moment in this family's life. I just think it's a really interesting juxtaposition. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. The we made the connection earlier between this movie Psycho and Silence of the Lambs as both being all being stories that are inspired by the Ed Gein killings. And what I think is really fascinating about those three, and then, you know, many, many other horror stories that have been similarly inspired by or were inspired by those movies themselves, is this idea of the kind of typical American home and the sort of, the nuclear family, the standalone American house, and that idea that within that house, you know, that's a closed off unit. You can be invited in, but you can't fully penetrate all of its secrets if you don't live there. And so this idea that there could be evil festering inside of there could be unspeakable horrors, there could be, just things beyond our imagination. And then one day, all of a sudden, those things get cracked open and you see what's been going on inside that house, you know, behind closed doors. Like, that is just, I feel like, such a uniquely kind of horror trope that is ground into the DNA of America, of, like, you know, we all want to have our own independent houses where we can live with our families, but what actually goes on? I don't
anymore after watching this movie.
But yeah, I mean, that to me was the thing that disturbed me most about this movie, is that family idea, and that idea of, like, this has been going on for so long. This house is covered in bones, in feathers, in dust, in grime, in blood.
Cars.
Cars. So many cars. That this family has been allowed to operate unnoticed, undetected in, you know, it's pretty isolated, but the way that this has been just right under everybody's noses, and yet they've been able to continue with it, and for as long as they have, it's just, yeah, so incredibly disturbing. And, like, the fact that this was, you know, a 70s movie, and, like you said, not shot on, like, the highest quality 35 millimeter film. It's a little bit grainier with that 70s sheen. It's kind of, you know, everything's kind of run down. Everything's a bit dirty and musty. All the clothes look really lived in.
Well, they are.
Yes, we found out. Yeah. Literally lived in for at least for a month or more, 16 hours a day. But, like, you know, just the aesthetics of the time period and the way that this movie was made really enhances it, because you just feel the grime and the sweat on everybody. It feels so visceral. And I think that's what really disturbed me about this movie, is how visceral it feels, you know? It gets under my skin in a way that other movies with kind of similar tropes or similar ideas necessarily haven't. Like, this one really feels, you know, the sort of disturbing sense you have of, like, yeah, like that sort of erratic, like I have no idea how something is going to go, like staring into the mouth of madness kind of thing. There's just this unending vortex of darkness, and you can't feel like you can't, find your way all the way through it, and it's just terrifying to me.
I'm really glad that this movie was made when it was, because I feel like if this movie was made now, it just would look it would look a lot better, but because of that, it would look a lot worse. You know what I mean?
No, it would just look worse, honestly. Because I was just thinking, like, as I was saying, that this movie is lit so well, and the everything about it being really lived in, like, works so well for what it's doing. And I'm just imagining this movie with, like, the really flat Netflix lighting, and everything is so oversaturated, and everyone's clothes are just so perfectly styled and clean, and I'm just like, no.
I feel like too, even if something like A24, Blumhouse, for example, like even if they got an indie filmmaker to do this, it still would look too clean. Like even if they shot it on film and tried to make it look gritty like this, it still wouldn't work. There's something about just the way that cinema has progressed that I don't think we could capture this movie in the same way if we did it now. It would just feel a lot more, no matter how gritty we tried to make it, it would still look more polished. And I think the fact that this movie is so unpolished, it has to look that way. If it doesn't look that way, it doesn't work.
Agreed.
So yeah, I'm really glad it was made when it was, and like, which is why this movie has, I think, been remade once, like in 2000 something, and it's terrible. But
did you watch the remake, or are you going off of reviews?
I'm going off of reviews and clips that I've seen, and I don't know. Maybe, if anyone listening to this podcast has seen any of the sequels to this movie and you like them, shoot us an email and let us know why. I haven't seen any of them, but I have heard tale that they're not the best necessarily, but who knows?
This is a random question, but thinking again about low budget horror, which was then later remade. Have you seen either of the Evil Dead movies? Or I shouldn't say either, because there's more than two, but
I've seen the first one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we can kind of move on from there. I mean, I feel like we've touched a lot of the main points. It's a pretty simple movie in lots of ways, in terms of like the story. Which is one of the things I love about it. I think the thing that makes it stand out is just the way that it's shot and the way that it's structured, because the story in and of itself is not particularly, interesting in and of itself. It's the way that it's told that really helps elevate it. So moving on a little bit. So this movie did not receive any awards or nominations at all, which not particularly surprising.
No.
Fun fact just for you, Geneva, Roger Ebert did not like this movie.
Oh, interesting.
I almost put his review here, but I didn't.
Do you remember what it was that turned him off about it?
He just didn't get it. He was like, it's well made, but at the end of the day, what is the point? Like,
yeah, that's
why
where I'm
watch this. Yeah. He's like, what are we getting out of this experience?
What are we doing here?
But yeah, but even that being said, this movie, like I mentioned before, does have a lot of controversy around it. But even so, I think I mentioned it is known to be one of the greatest horror films of all time, or recognized to be that. It has an 88 on Metacritic, and it holds an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes. So clearly, has a high status. People like it. So, so I pulled a review from Tom Coates from BBC Home. It's a little bit long, but I'm just going to read it anyway, because there's so much about this movie, like all the research and all the reviews. There's just so much. He writes, like any decent slasher movie, there's something unsettling about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that goes beyond the blood and gore. Leatherface is a purely murderous creature. There's no reasoning or placating with him, but he's still a plausible one. And the shaky camera work, lo-fi special effects, and down and dirty screams and Chainsaw's soundtrack all help give the film a terrifyingly believable documentary quality. You'll be surprised at how much you don't see, how few directly gore-ridden moments there are, and how totally lacking in escape it is. but the film remains a stunning example of remorseless horror and an unmissable
I think
panacea to the prepackaged faux horror that we've all become slowly accustomed to. I think that that's a perfect review that so beautifully sums up what makes this movie great and how it stands out from how the horror genre has evolved. So yeah, I really liked that one.
Yeah, it's a good review.
Yeah. So I guess just to kind of close out here, in terms of things that are going, I don't know if I was moved in any sort of way, but something about this movie that has stuck with me and will continue to stick with me is, again, just that but that first kill moment where we just see kind of a foreshadowing of what's to come in terms of the way that Leatherface just so naturally kills this victim and then so violently slams the door shut. Like, it's just, it's such an incredible introduction to what is going to happen. And, yeah, I love that moment. There's other things that I think I said that I appreciate about this movie, but that moment in particular, I think is just so chilling, that's what sticks with me. So Geneva, I'm assuming what's going to stick with you is just how much you felt sick to your stomach while watching this film, but is there anything else beyond that?
More or less. I mean, I think just that first scene with the hitchhiker and just kind of everything is really creepy and unsettling to begin with, and then just the dawning sort of like, oh no, things are going really sideways. Oh no, what do we do? Mm-hmm. It just kind of it so perfectly sets the tone for the rest of the movie and how everything is going to be unsettling and creepy, but you cannot predict at any moment what is going to happen. And it does it really well, and it's so visceral and it feels so real. And that's why it disturbs me so much. Yep. Yes. Well, again, thank you for watching this movie. I'm glad that I hope you're glad that maybe you've seen it now. I don't know. Yeah, like I said, I'm not sorry that I've watched it. I'm glad that I can put it on my list of horror movies I have watched, and I know what they are. But I don't think I'm ever going to watch it again. Yeah. Well, thanks for sticking with it. But yeah, you get to choose the horror movie for next week. So what will we be talking about? Yes. Next week we are going to talk about another pretty bleak, relentless movie, but one that is one that I really love. We're watching 28 Days Later from 2002. So shifting over from slashers into zombies ? Yes. Before we say goodbye, oh my gosh, thank you for, I totally forgot. So do you have a recommendation of a funny YouTube video or compilation or sitcom episode or anything like that? I do, because I just sent it to you earlier today. I thought you might choose that, but yeah, I mean, it's just the one that comes to my mind right now. But so I think I mentioned before that I'm having a little bit of a rough time in my life personally. And so I'm trying to just like watch things that cheer me up. So I have been watching, just a few times every here and there the last few days. There is an incredible compilation on YouTube of Robert Pattinson just like completely hating on the Twilight Saga and how dumb he thinks it is and how much he didn't like being a part of it and how crazy he thinks Stephenie Meyer is as a person. It is called, very simply, Robert Pattinson Hates Twilight. It's a 3-minute compilation of all of his interviews across that time period. Highly recommend. Even if you haven't seen Twilight or read Twilight, I feel like you can still get the humor out of it. So yeah, go over there, check it out. Hopefully it'll make you laugh because it makes me cry laugh every time I watch it. So yeah. What I will recommend is what I ended up watching last night after I finished this movie. Well, I watched a couple different things to try and clear my head a little bit. I watched an episode of Key and Peele. What time did you watch this movie? Started it later than I should have. I think I finished around maybe 11:30. Oh, you watched it like at night. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I had to wait till I got home from work.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that has a huge relationship, or a huge way on how you experienced it the way that you did.
Yeah. It was maybe not the perfect.
Both times I have watched this movie, I've watched it during the day. Both times. So,
yeah, that might help. Help. But yeah. But yeah, so I watched an episode of Key and Peele, which is great. Highly recommend Key and Peele. But I also ended up on a compilation of so there's a show, so this is horror theme, so appropriate. There was a show, a Ryan Murphy show from like 10 years ago or so called Scream Queens. And in the show was one of the core cast members was my man, Glenn Powell. And he is hilarious in this show. And so I just watched a compilation of the best of his characters. His character's name was Chad Radwell, playing this like self-absorbed, preppy, trust fund kid who's like weirdly smart, but also really, really dumb. And it always cracks me up every time I watch a compilation of those scenes. So yeah, highly recommend Glenn Powell's scenes as Chad Radwell from Scream Queens.
I don't know what's happening with the Ryan Murphy algorithm, but I keep getting suggestions for like Glee things on YouTube. I never watched Glee, but I did watch one the other day because it was like the worst performance and the best performance of every actor on the show. And so it was like this 20-minute video of like, let's show the worst.
That show had a million characters too. Like, I know that would take quite a while.
They did all the guest stars. They did like Idina Menzel, Catherine Hardwicke, Adam Lambert. I'm like, wow, this is a long video. Wow. But I'm trying to drown out my sadness, so it's fine.
Did they include Gwyneth Paltrow's performance of "Fuck You" by CeeLo Green? And was it best or worst?
I don't remember if it was best or worst. Both of them were bad because it's Gwyneth Paltrow singing. But I don't remember which one it was. But yeah, I actually think I really like Ryan Murphy. I know you don't like him, but I think I like him a lot. Even though I never really watched Glee. But anyway.
Yeah, I did watch the first 2 seasons of Glee, and then I fell off.
Yeah. Anyway, okay.
Anyway, all right.
Cool. So yeah, next week, 28 days later, and we will see you guys all then. Happy Halloween, I guess, because I think our next episode comes out after Halloween.
I think it comes out on Halloween. Am I wrong about this?
Ooh,
spooky.
Let me look at my calendar. Oh, yes. Yes, it does. Well, okay.
All right. Happy
Listen
1 week
to this
till
on
Halloween.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at yourpickpod@gmail.com. Our theme song was composed by Joel Rushton, and our podcast graphic was designed by Kara Shin. If you like this show and want to hear more, please rate and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We're excited to have you on this journey with us. Until next time.